Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Aubrey Fine. Aubrey is a licensed psychologist, best-selling author, professor emeritus at the California State Poly University, and he's an expert in the field of human-animal interactions. It's a fantastic conversation, all about animals and how they're good for us. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Dr. Fine. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Now, can I call you Aubrey? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking for someone to talk about animals and how they impact our lives in a positive way, and what it means to have the love of an animal in your life, and what to do if we don't have animals in our life and we want to. So for somebody who's not familiar with your work, how do you describe your work? Because you kind of do a lot.
It's that's a good question. I'm a professor in California, but grew up in Montreal, and I specialize in working with children. It's funny that a lot of people, when they talk to me, and the first question they ask me is, am I a veterinarian? And then I explain, no, I'm a psychologist that works with children. And 50 years ago, while I lived in Montreal, I had a serendipitous experience with my first pet, which was a gerbil that actually changed my life. And so for the last 50 years, I've worked alongside animals. And some people even once called me, was I a living Dr. Dolittle? And really, I don't talk to the animals, I talk to my own animals, but I've learned over the last 50 years to talk through animals and to work alongside, in my case, therapy animals. So I have been blessed with animals, and considering the fact that I grew up with none as a child and actually grew up afraid of dogs, who would think that years later that my life would be enriched with so many species of animals that I've lived with and shared my life with.
So I find it so fascinating that you didn't grow up with animals, yet here you are. You've written books. This is your work now. I guess when we're kids, it's our parents or our caregivers that make the decisions as to whether we're going to have a pet or not. It's not the child's decision.
No, you're right with that. But I do think that sometimes kids can be very assertive in telling their moms or dads, hey, I want to have a pet. And when you look at the largest consumers of having family pets, it's actually families that have children at first. And then we see a variety of ages of people that have animals in their lives. So I think that in my message, I can't even imagine bringing up my boys without animals in their lives. And they've continued that legacy by having animals in their families. So, and we've had so many species. We've gone from four-leggers to wingers, which I call birds. I had cockatoos and cockatiels and lovebirds and conures, and we've had rabbits and lizards and the whole gamut of animals. But each brings a special piece to the equation. And maybe I can use one word as we begin this whole journey that's short, that over the years I've learned that all people need champions. And in fact, champions can be our human counterparts. They can be our relatives. They can be the people that we love. But our champions sometimes may not even speak with us. Our champions can just sit next to us and nuzzle next to us. And in so many ways, I found my animals have acted as my champions. And in that respect, I've acted as their champions because over the years, I've advocated for their better understanding that in fact, I have become their voice and let people know how important animals are and that we need to treat them well. So this is not only about me, it's about the animals that I'm surrounded with.
I agree, totally. So let's talk about what an animal does what does an animal do, that relationship? What does it do to us physically or mentally? Like, do they change us?
That's a good question. I love the word change us because I don't know what change actually means. Do they better us? Do they enrich us? Anecdotally, many people that listen to your program would say, I know exactly what we're talking about. I've lived with animals. They've enriched my life I cry with them, I laugh with them, I smile with them. Science over the last several decades is starting to catch up with what we know anecdotally, that animals are good for our well-being. So to answer your question, I could do it scientifically, but I also am human and have lived this. And so I celebrate that connection. Science has showed us that, of course, in the early 80s, we began to study the fact that being around animals that we felt comfortable with reduced our blood pressure. And so there was work on people that had heart attacks and looked at them after their heart attacks with animals in their lives. And so the research on cardiovascular changes, blood pressure, and breathing, respiration, all demonstrate that being around our animals help with that. On the other hand, over the last several decades, since that early work, and I'll bore your listeners with just a little bit of research, we've seen that animals also reduce stress. So if you look at the issue of the stress hormones that we have, there's a reduction in that. And then, of course, probably the most newest research that we've seen in the last, since 2003, so it's about 20 years now, is the notion that some of our neurotransmitters change. So sometimes, like when I come into the house and my dogs greet me, or when I go visit my friend, the horse, I get those sparklies, those good feelings. Well, that's oxytocin, if I use the boring term rather than calling it the love transmitter. So we've really realized that those things change as our relationships are enriched. The most fascinating part is that not only does it happen with us, but when we connect with our animals in solace, when we cuddle with them, not only do we feel better, guess what? They do as well. And that's where the reciprocal part of the relationship is, because the bond shouldn't only be about humans, it's the connections between the two.
Yes. So if in your work, when you're working with children, and I know you do a lot of work with ADHD and other challenges, what do you see happen when you bring animal therapy? Is that the right thing to call it? Animal therapy into the equation.
Let me give you an example. Many, many years ago, and this actually happened in Montreal. We'll use that gerbil that I told you about. Very apropos. I remember when I got Sasha, I was working in a program for the Quebec Association for Children with Learning Disabilities, and it was in a suburb called Laval outside Montreal. And I had Sasha now for about 6-8 months, and I really loved her. And so I thought one day I was going to bring her as, I want to use the word a show and tell, a share. I was just going to bring the animal in. And I never heard of animal-assisted therapy at that time, because you're looking at the early 70s where this was just an emerging area. Well, I remember a little boy, and we'll just call him Stephen. That wasn't his name. And when I walked in the door, lots of kids met me. And some kids said, what kind of animal is that? Why are you bringing that animal in the cold of Montreal winter to this program? And I answered all of their questions, explained it was a gerbil. But this one little boy, Stephen, said something to me that I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. He said, could I hold her? And I looked and said, okay. So I said to Stephen, come to the side with me. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to sit down on the floor, cross your legs, and then I want you to put your hands up on your tummy. But I have to get you to promise me something. I need you to be very still, because I don't want you to move, because I don't want to scare our little friend. And he looked at me with a smile on his face, and he said, I promise. Now, again, this would be a boy that today would have been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, I'm not sure exactly what I expected to occur, and I don't remember all the details 50 years later, because it is 50 years ago. That was 73. But as I put Sasha in his palms, Sasha felt comfortable because they stayed still and they were secure. And all of a sudden, she meandered on his tummy and then meandered down back into his palms. And then all I remember is a little boy with eyes beaming with joy and pride looking at me and saying, you see, I promised you I wouldn't move, and I didn't. And it was that aha moment 50 years ago that changed my life. And so over the years, I've learned to talk through animals, work alongside animals. I want to be clear with the word work alongside. They're not tools. They're not magic tricks. They're really sentient beings that I've learned over the years to work alongside with, almost like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. We dance together because these animals are really well trained. That's one example, but I've done 50 years, I could give you so many anecdotes and research outcomes, but what a wonderful, wonderful moment that not only changed the boy because he knew I gave him confidence. So animals can provide a sense of self-regulation. Again, animals can act as a social lubricant. If you're, when I'm a therapist, for example, it's easier for me to connect with the humans I'm talking with because the warm heart and the cold nose of a golden retriever sitting right next to me or sitting right next to you. Animals as pets, for example, provide us unconditional love. They provide us with joy. They provide us with opportunities to sometimes deal with our own emotions. So, for example, children, even adults that are having difficult days, sometimes we don't want to talk to anyone, do we? But sometimes sitting next to an animal, the physical proximity, the petting, the touching, the eyes. And in fact, when I was talking about oxytocin, how many of you have ever realized that you've heard the line, the eyes are the vessel to the soul? Well, in fact, when you look in the eyes of the one you love, that's when oxytocin rises the highest. So when you look at mom's breastfeeding, for example, the connection between the eyes is that connection that builds attachment. It's the attachment that we build that helps with that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to have this conversation with you because I'm someone who's always had pets. I had pets from my parents had pets when I was born, and I could list every pet you just named, that, the lovebirds and the this and that. I've had them all. Like I brought, I would bring tadpoles home. I would, I was just always that kid. And then I became an adult who wanted to have as many pets as I could have. And now we have 2 dogs and 2 cats and 3 kids. And I see it with my own children, the benefits of having animals in the house and that connection that you're talking about. So if a parent is listening now and going, because we can only do what, I shouldn't say that. I'm talking to a therapist here. We do what we learn growing up, right? So if you didn't have pets, a lot of times you won't have pets as an adult because it seems daunting, or you don't know what to do, or whatever it might be. So if someone's listening right now and they're like, gosh, I'm not a dog or a cat person, or I think my kid's fine without them. And that might be true, but what would you say to that parent?
Well, look at me.
Yeah.
I grew up never having a pet. I grew up being afraid of dogs. And I don't want to say I'm a testimony because I'm just me, not anyone special. But I learned very, very quickly that my life is so much more rich with the diversity of beings that I have. And, I've had many mentors in my life, but if I told your listeners that sometimes my best mentors have been the animals that I'm surrounded with. One of the plaques that I even have is, I wish I can be the person that my dog thinks I am. And, so to answer your question, you know what, you're right. For some people, we're not folks that maybe are comfortable with animals in our homes. We may appreciate their benefit. And so, there are lots of other ways to celebrate having animals in your life, because I think it really is important, and I'll answer your first question, then jump to a segue. It's important that if we bring an animal into our lives, one of the things I always say is that it has to be a commitment, and it has to be an honest commitment. And for me, it's always a life commitment, that I recognize that having a pet in your life isn't just coming home and putting some dog food out. It's time, when I travel, we have to have babysitters for different species of animals because some people aren't that comfortable with lizards as they are with birds or dogs. The other side to this, of course, is the whole social media side which in fact you and I are doing right now when we're just talking. Our listeners today wouldn't have heard us talk if we didn't have this outlet, which is called a podcast. So many people turn to social media. So many people turn to television marketplaces where they watch animals, they watch nature. And there's a whole field that we could talk about called biophilia, which basically means we are predetermined to have an innate desire to be around nature. There's a lot of research that came out with a gentleman years ago his name was E.O. Wilson. So the reality is some of us like to take walks in nature. Some of us like to watch a fish tank. And just watching a fish tank, if you've ever gone to a doctor's office, and sometimes they have fish tanks. Well, the reason the fish tank is there, it brings a sense of comfort. In fact, I had tanks in my office that parents said that the happiest moments of my life are when I sit here and watch your either your terrarium or your fish tank, because I had a saltwater tank, because it makes me feel comfortable. How many people watch the networks? I won't say the networks that celebrate our connection with animals. So we sometimes can get some of the same joys and benefits, not up close to animals, but sometimes just watching them live their lives. Sometimes the joyful experience of seeing a dog slide down the snow, or seeing a mom and a puppy snuggling. We still sometimes serendipitously can experience some of those same experiences that I talked about, bringing down your blood pressure, bringing down your sense of stress, the cortisol that I noted early on. So I think to me, the important part in one of the books that I wrote years ago, and I'm not here to promote books because I'm really here to promote the bond, because I believe this. You're talking to, I don't want to call the word a reformer, but a person that was denied the experience at first, that learned it. So I think animals can be with us in so many ways. And so, my wife always giggles when we walk and I'll see a dog on the street. And next thing she knows, she's mumbling, here he goes, because I'm going to go over and say, may I meet your dog or your bird?
I do the same thing.
So again, I think that it's important for us to recognize there are many, many ways to get to that place. But I do think that it's important that as citizens of Canada, we recognize the gifts that animals give us. Sometimes the simplicity of nature is not tinsel and tin. You know what I mean? When you think of people wanting things, I don't want those things. I want to find what I call happiness, and the greatest joys that I have found aren't tinsel and tin, but love and connections. And some of my best connections have been my animals in my home and the animals that I've met over the years of travel and have befriended.
Yeah. And again, you've just said a whole bunch of things that have made me think, how much it makes me so happy to have my morning coffee looking out the window at my bird feeder, where I went and bought the kids a little map of all the backyard birds in BC so that they can identify the birds that are coming to the feeder, because it makes us happy to see them. Oh, there's a junco, there's a nuthatch, so I mean, it is little things like that really can, there's a resident woodpecker in the neighborhood, and we can be outside and he'll start hammering away on the telephone pole, and people walking by will stop what they're doing to look for him and start laughing, because it's not funny when the woodpecker's on your chimney, but it sure is funny when the woodpecker is on a telephone pole in the middle of the afternoon, right? And it's like, those are the little things you're talking about, right? That make us feel good.
And it doesn't have to be a woodpecker. I think of my son, who's now 40, who has 2 cats. But when we lived in a little town called Chino, California, we had a cat that wandered throughout the streets. And my little son, who was 1.5, adopted her as his friend. And we would feed her, and he always would run to the window. And eventually we kept Kitty with us. And it was amazing when you watched our family go for the night walks. We had Kitty and our first golden retriever, Goldie, and my little son in a tricycle, and us walking all together. And it was just that experience. The other side is knowing certain animals. Remember, I mentioned this horse that I've adopted. One hasn't lived until a horse at the back of a pasture sees you and runs full gallop to say hello. So it's almost like the TV show Cheers, where everybody knows your name. So animals can't call out your name, but it was like when I would come home from work, the dogs would be barking, the birds would be screeching. It's not like my wife was running to the door screaming, "He's home!" But that unconditional love, that acceptance. And so, with children, animals help us understand that you don't have to dress super nice. You don't have to be the smartest person in the world. But if you demonstrate love, you demonstrate care and concern, the animals will come back. And so putting the little bird seed out encourages those birds in your neighborhood to come visit you. And sometimes you just see them and you giggle, you smile. And those are the joys that we're talking about here. And over the years, animals can act as social capital. What I mean by social capital is that in so many ways, animals are ways that open up doors. They're almost the glue that holds our lives together. Think about it. We gave our example together when we walk on the street. What's it like for me when I walk with my birds and a dog? How many people come over and say, "Wow, what's the name of that cockatoo? How old is she?" So again, it causes that conversation. When you look at dog parks, nature walks, sometimes we walk with people that have dogs, and all of a sudden you become friends with them. Hey, let's meet next Saturday and we'll take a walk with both our Airedale and Golden Retriever together. And that's what social capital means.
It's amazing. One of the things we like to do on this podcast is give back and thank our guests for being here. So we always ask them to choose a Canadian nonprofit. And you chose Dreamcatcher Nature Assisted Therapy Association. And they are just outside of Edmonton. And they provide counseling, therapy, and psychological service to the community. And they are certified in animal assisted therapy nationwide. So thank you for choosing them. We will be giving them $500 in your name. And so we really appreciate that.
I'm honored to be here. And again, just talking about, if I can leave a note in regards to, since this is a podcast, I thought I would just note that if you ever want to look at social media, beginning in February, they're going to have it's called Comfort Critter playlist on YouTube, that if you just want to get a dose of feeling good about animals that don't live in your home, that's another place to see them.
Yes, because I was going to ask you about that, because if somebody is listening and they're like, "Listen, I can't have a hamster and I can't have this and but I am interested in this, or I have severe allergies to every animal that there is, but I want to enjoy this." Can we benefit from watching animals on screen? Like, does that help us too?
Absolutely. And I mentioned that earlier on, that for sure, there are many ways to benefit from the interactions that we have with animals. And I think I remember being a young child and watching shows like The Wild Kingdom.
That's what I was trying to remember the name of Wild Kingdom. I remember that show so much.
In fact, I went to Africa after I started to learn about this connection, and I wanted to know why a kid that grew up in Montreal all of a sudden became so connected to animals, and I wasn't as a little boy. And so I went to Africa and I saw lions and cheetahs and elephants, and I loved it. But the name of the story that I wrote was "Follow the Yellow Brick Road, It Leads Home," because I went all the way to Africa to realize that although I was infatuated with all of the exotic animals, it was my four-legged buddies and wingers that really made me want to find that. So again, everyone needs a champion. Probably one of the greatest champions that we can find beyond our family members and friends are the animals that surround us. And
Mm.
I've learned
And
that.
so, one thing I noticed, and you probably have too, is during the pandemic, a lot of people got pets. Um, and I mean, I noticed because I see a lot more people walking their dogs down my street than ever before. And I mean, I guess that's a good thing. It is harder to find, a vet nowadays and stuff like that. But it is a good thing. And I think that it's a bright side of the pandemic that it really did open up maybe people who weren't considering the love of an animal to consider that for their family. And I know a lot of people have benefited greatly from it.
If I could add to that, prior to the pandemic, I was at a conference that was set up for a select group of people. It was a think tank, and it was called "What is the greatest?" And it was called actually the pandemic. What's one of the greatest pandemics that we in North America are facing? And it was the implications of social isolation and loneliness, and what roles that animals have. We spoke about that in May, 9 months before the pandemic hit. And so I've edited a journal, in fact, that looked at the implications. So I've gone through lots of studies. I did a couple of studies, one looking at people that had long-term AIDS and the role that animals had during COVID for them. Um, in essence, having somebody to confide with, especially those that were isolated and lonely, is really crucial. In fact, there was even a study that once said that loneliness and isolation is such a psychological challenge that it is as significant as the health factor that when you think of a person smoking 15 cigarettes a day, that in fact, that is significant. And what we found in some of the research from the pandemic is that some people learned that having companionship, having routine in their life, because you still had to do things for the animal, probably the most significant outcome that came from some of the research that was published was the implications of having physical proximity, being able, if you're alone, being able to snuggle, not talk, but to snuggle, to get that physical sense of being. So serendipitously, the pandemic brought horrific outcomes for many humans, and I would not want to experience that again. But for some humans, they learned that they could share their love. A great line that I learned that years ago is, love in your heart wasn't meant to stay. Love in your heart was meant to give away. You can give it to humans. You can give it to friends. You can give it to family. And my animals are part of my family, but for sure, I've learned to share that love too. So it's a blessing.
I have a bit of a well, it's a question that every pet owner, animal lover has to deal with at some point. Is when their family member, their pet, their animal, passes away, dies, and it's the most horrible thing ever. And anyone who's ever been through it knows what I'm talking about. One thing that I found that I think that a lot of people have a hard time understanding, even myself, I do, is like, my first Airedale is behind me, Stanley. And when he died, it was awful and traumatic. And I mean, it was horrible. And then 6 months later, or maybe 4 months later, I got another Airedale. And I know that I am not the only person to do this. It made me feel happy and comfortable, yet guilty and bad. And I think that I can't tell you how many of my friends have been through the same thing. You probably have too. Why do we do that? Like, I mean, I don't ever want to be without an animal in my house, but are we thinking about it like humans too much? Like, oh, my partner dies and I get married a week later, or I don't know. Like, can you help me walk us through that? What we're doing?
Well, the hardest part about an animal passing away is loss. People grieve in different ways. And in fact, I just dealt with this weekend. Years ago, I wrote a children's book that was called Give a Dog Your Heart and Love Will Come Your Way. The reality is, we know there's always a beginning, and we know, unfortunately, that there's always an end. And I talk to people about celebrating the middle. The middle is the lifetime that we celebrate and we remember. So, you think of movies like Coco and that when you could hold on. But the hard part to answer your question is many people ask individuals, why do you do it? Why do you get an animal and know that your heart's going to be broken? And you know what? The answer is complicated because your heart does break. Every day I think of so many of the animals that I've lived with that have passed on, but you know what? Sometimes the tears become tears of joy. Many times I smile and reflect on the days of past. My life is blessed from those things, so I realize that the pain is something that I have to go through. So why do people do this? Now you have to understand, Tamara, that 40, 50 years ago, if I came to you and said my bird died or my dog died, you'd say, big deal, go get a new one, no issue. Because I think what's happened in the last 50 years is people have realized that animals as sentient beings are members of our family. At one time, they lived outside in our backyards or in our garages. They went from there, from the backyard garages into our homes, into our living rooms, and into our bedrooms. We have changed the way we see animals. So the death of an animal is important. And one of the things that we talk to parents about, in fact, when they get pets, is to realize you need to look at life trajectory. So I have one dog that's 12 now that I take tremendous care of. She turned blind. She just started having seizures. I know that there will be a time that I'll have to say goodbye, and I'll look and I'll cry but I'll also remember. And I always, when this happens, snuggle and when I have the chance, and if an animal has to be euthanized, is I spend that time talking and saying thank you for what we've had together, and thank you for being you. So are you crazy? No. Some people say I need to get an animal right away, and I don't think I have the right to tell you not to. See, I could say, go through that sense of grief, but we all grieve differently. And so as a consequence, sometimes some people, the way they settle is I need to move forward. That doesn't mean that you're going to get another Penelope, because you're never going to get the same Penelope, but you're going to be able to share your love with another being that reminds you of your relationship. So I think that's important. And it is hard, and many parents at times don't want to talk about this, but it's not only parents. What is it like for an older person, an older citizen that might be in Calgary or can be in Halifax right now, and they can remember, what's it like when my dog passed away, or what's it like when I have it right now? But I've talked to seniors over the years, and when we reminisce, who do you think they talk about the most?
Yeah, I know.
They
So
talk
true.
about them.
It's so true. It's so true. I appreciate your obvious deep love for what animals give us. And I agree with you. I have, lots of journals from when I was a kid of all the poems I wrote to each of my pets, or songs that I wrote to them, or whatever it might be, right? Because they are a big part of our lives. And I also love how you said that we can benefit from watching them on screen. I mean, there must be, my husband always says the internet was invented for cats, for cat videos, right? Because there's so many cat videos on the internet, because they make us laugh and they make us feel good, right? And that's what it's all about. And what a gift it is that we can share our lives with animals.
I agree. I think that I always sign my cards with "Celebrate the Bond," and could you imagine 50 years ago? I may have never been able to say that because I didn't have that experience. So again, never be afraid to try new things, and what you don't know, sometimes you need to know. And all I said is that science is really documenting this even stronger, that there are tremendous benefits from this bond, and Canada's rich with not only our domestic animals, but Canada's rich with so many animals in our wilderness that make it such a beautiful spot. I flew to Churchill
Absolutely.
just to see polar bears. I went up to
Yeah.
Churchill.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah,
I've only seen them on videos, on screens. So there you go. And I still feel good about it. So
absolutely. Well, it's
thank
wonderful
you.
to be back.
Yes, yes, and thank you so much for your time. I just want people to understand that they can go to your website, which is aubreyhfine.com, and find all your books there and research and where you will be next speaking and all those great things. So again, Aubrey, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.